Hello and welcome to the Young Entrepreneurs Syndicate podcast with myself, Jim Riley, and Rod Kuntz. We are post-Christmas, but pre-New Year's Eve. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, thanks. This is that favorite time of year where you get into that look back at the last year, and it ends on a high. You know, it ends on that Merry Christmas and all the festivities and all the good things and all the things we're grateful for. And that's a good way to start the new year, remembering all the good stuff from last year. And then we'll start off the new year. You know, how we end last year is how we begin new year. So
yeah, I like that perspective. I never really thought about it that way. Speaking of the new year and, where we're going and stuff, what's kind of cool, we've talked about this in our syndicate before, like get started now. Don't wait until New Year's to do that. And if you're one of those people that waited till New Year's, that's fine. Get started then, though. Don't procrastinate any further. But, I like what Andy Frisella says once in a while. He'll remind people, like, what you're doing today, you'll see the results in 90 days. Or in other words, what I'm seeing today is what I did 90 days ago. And I know both you and we're constantly retooling our businesses in preparation for the future. And right now, we're full steam ahead in our business ventures together, and it feels really good. And Rachel's not here right now, but Rachel and you and I, we've been grinding, and it feels good to look back, as you just suggested, but also to know where we're at today and how much further along we are because of those efforts.
Absolutely. And there's no time to stop. You think about it, and we've got a conscious mind and a subconscious mind. And even when our conscious mind is stopped, our subconscious mind is still pumping the blood, still keeping our blood pressure up, our heart rate up. It's still digesting food, And so even when we take those breaks, we have to have our businesses to a point where the subconscious kicks in. Yeah. Our businesses are still moving forward. What we've planted is still growing, right? So we just have to remember that. The subconscious never stops.
I want to say one more thing, and then I'm going to dive into today's topic, or at least what I told you the topic was. What I wanted to say is having faith over fear is such a powerful tool. And, wherever you get your faith from, mine comes from God. Some call it a higher power. But, I've practiced having faith the last several years, but even in this most recent month of December, going into the month, I've got some transitionary clients, and I've just was praying and having faith in the process, right? That God's always provided for me. And getting into the real holiday season, the time when people start taking time off and disappearing from business, I started getting a little bit weak in the knees, like, I really got to secure a big client. But I continue to practice having faith. And it was literally 2 days before my kids were out for Christmas break, I had a client call, completely unexpected, and just dropped this massive bomb of goodness on my plate and said, "Hey, we want to do this starting January. This is the value that we want to give you to do it. And we just wanted to ask you if you'd be willing." And I was like, not only am I willing and able, but the answer is yes, right? I got off the phone and I told my kids, because they were on speakerphone actually, like, "What was that all about, Dad?" I said, "Well, that was about having faith and just our prayers being answered and the work that we've put in being answered. And we don't have to worry about, the kickoff of the year, nor should we ever worry about it. But, everything's going to be okay because we've had this faith over fear." And I just want to encourage people to do that, because your needs will be taken care of if you have the faith to do that. And what was cool for me, Rod, and, I'll get to the topic. What was cool is I had to constantly remind myself over the holiday, hey, it's okay. Enjoy your family. Enjoy the work that you've done. Enjoy the process. And that doesn't mean disconnect 100%, but it's okay to enjoy that work as well. So anyways, absolutely. I decided to share that.
Well, thanks.
Okay. Today's topic, and this is what I'm going to kick it off with. By the way, I text Rod really at a moment's notice, like, okay, let's record, and here's the topic. And every time it's like what are those speeches that you do in school?
Shotgun speech. A shotgun speech.
Every time it's a shotgun speech for you, Rod. So here it is. I texted Rod. I said, we're going to talk about the WARPATH Alliance book, which is, of course, written by Rod Kuntz. And if you haven't read it, you can grab a copy of it on our syndicate website. So Young Entrepreneurs Syndicate.com. Go on there. The book is the WARPATH Alliance. And this is the beginning of the conversation. Everyone wants to be a warrior, but nobody wants to do what warriors do. And that's a quote by Geronimo. And when you open Rod's book, that's the first thing that you will read and see. And Rod, I wanted to talk about that, why you put that in the front of your book, what that means to you, because as we look into a new year and where people's headspace is at currently, and hopefully you're listening to this before January 1st and you get into it, think about this quote and what Rod's going to explain to us, because it can be a very powerful statement going into your goals and your vision.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I went through literally thousands of different quotes, and there are lots of quotes in the book, because I think, we gain those little insights of just pure genius from other people, that can motivate us and inspire us. And when I'd finished compiling all the leadership traits, and my book took a totally different direction than I originally planned on, right? It was one of those faith over fear moments, right? It's like, wow, gosh, I have this, I want to do it, but it just didn't come together. And then one day it did. And when it did, it was this quote that rose to the top, because it ties everything together. And that's where true leadership happens on the warpath. It doesn't happen at a picnic, right? True inspiration happens in the midst of conflict. True courage is developed and manifested in the throes of battle, not on the parade field, right? That's where the metal is forged. That's where the edge is sharpened. It's when we have that conflict. And everybody wants the great stuff. They want the picnic. They want the parade. They want the accolades. They want the fame. They want all the glory and the money and all the things that they think success mean. But you don't get that unless, right? That comes after. You don't get it. So everybody wants all those trappings, but they don't want what's really required to get it. And that means you got to go to the battlefield, whatever that battlefield is to you. If you want to improve your relationship, but you don't want to have those hard conversations. If you want your business to go to the next level and you've got problem employees, but you don't want to deal with them, right? You can't get better without confronting the conflict, without engaging in the battle. You just can't do it. And so Geronimo, that quote is absolutely perfect, because he understood that about people. He understood that, I think, about himself. At some point, we have to engage in the battle. We have to suit up, and we have to say, this is going to be hard. It's going to be difficult, and I'm just going to do it. So that's the biggest insight right there.
And I appreciate that insight. And I think there's so much more to that, because I think about your story and the stories you've told in this book, but I can end on the first line here. It says, everyone wants to be a warrior, comma. That can be, depicted in a number of ways. Just as a quick example, I mean, if you're watching this video, my background, you can see all these business books, right? Well, I want to be a businessman, but having those books behind me don't make me a businessman, nor did it make any of those authors business people either. They had to go through the battle to be able to write those books.
Right. Absolutely right.
I always come back to it because it's one of my favorite stories in your book, and it's about your time out in the plains hunting coyotes. You had to become a warrior. You literally had to become that and suffer through, what I'm sure were some very hard days to earn a living, doing something that you were passionate about. And some days I'm sure you loved it, and some days I'm sure you hated it. And it's those times that built you to be the person that you are today. Do you want to share? You don't have to share anything about those times, but maybe some of the times where you had to be a warrior and endure some difficulties and some challenges that pay dividends down the road.
All of them. they they all pay dividends down the road, and sometimes you don't realize it until you're down the road.
Yeah.
And that's just the long and the short of it. And the good news is that the worst times, was it a Dickens book? These were the best of times, these were the worst of times, right? That's how the book starts. And they are the same. They can be the same. And we don't understand that until we're actually beyond that. And those are the times that strengthen us. Those are the times that we get to really find out who we are, what's deep down inside. And the hunting coyotes, and I've actually thought about that a lot in the last week, because you actually experienced some of the weather that we hunted in last week.
Yeah.
We did minus 20 degree days and plus, and right after a fresh Arctic blizzard came through, and those were the best hunting days. And boy, it sure would have been easier to stay in bed, to stay home, to say, well, it's too cold, but we didn't. And yes, those were brutal times also. That's when, you get 20 below plus, and that's when equipment failures happen. That's when breakdowns happen. That's when you get careless. That's when you're cold and you're not as reactive. You can be on your game and still not be at 100%. And yet those are the times memories are also made of, right? Those are the moments on that knife edge of literally life and death, where you realize that you have to dig deep, and you have to dig deep, not just to get into the battle, you have to dig deep to stay in the battle. And then you have to dig deeper to win the battle. And all of those things are worth it. And you may not think it while you're in the midst of it. It may just be, this sucks. This is horrid. Why don't we go home? Let's call it a day. We all do that. It happens all the time. And it's the persevering that makes you better. It's the persevering that makes the memories. It's the persevering that makes you the person you become. And that's the warrior. That's that warrior spirit, that warrior mentality. And it gets to be fun. It can be its own drive, to go out there, the thrill seeking, right? The adrenaline junkie, the rush. This is a form of that. Once you realize that you can make friends with adversity, right? That adversity becomes your ally, then you're invincible. When adversity becomes your ally, you're unstoppable. And that's just really, that's the nature of the warpath. And you don't get it until you do it, right? So I don't know, without getting too philosophical, those are just some of the life lessons that, are underneath that big umbrella. And then from there, I went in and started breaking it down, value by value, character trait by character trait. It takes a certain some many things to become that person that can stand in there and persevere. And ultimately, that's what God's looking for. Someone to stand in the gap. Yeah. Who's going to be the man? Who's going to be the woman to step up and do it?
I appreciate your perspective of, actually doing the work. And as you said, sometimes these are the best times, but they're also the worst of times. This was reminded of symbolism and, how we dress, what we do, the things we say, the books in the background. Sometimes they're symbolic for whom we really are. And sometimes they're just that. They're only a symbol of what we wish we could become or what we wish we could be doing. And we're not enjoying the full effect of it. I was just thinking about my own story. My wife got me a new cowboy hat for Christmas. And it's a summer hat. And I said, I appreciate that. I didn't even ask for one. She says, yeah, well, I noticed your other one. We wear straw hats in the summertime, sometimes in the winter, if that's all that's available on the way out the door. But she says, I was looking at your other one and it's just absolutely hammered. It's dirty. It's a wreck. It's cracking. I said, well, I put a lot of time in under that hat. And, for me, when I moved to Montana, by the way, most people know, if you know me from my background, I grew up at the beach and was a surfer boy. Cowboy hats weren't a part of my apparel, although my father was a cowboy and his father was a cowboy. And they were raised on ranches, and I spent a fair amount of childhood on those ranches wishing that I could be. So when I moved to Montana, I kind of had a license to wear my cowboy hat outside of my time in Mexico, by the way. But, I wore it in the beginning as a symbol of something that I wanted to be. And now, for looking at it almost 4 years later, it's a symbol of something that I've become. And what's interesting about that, Rod, talking about, your time out in the plains and enduring the hardships, right? And the value that comes out of that, even thinking about this cold snap, I chose the life that I have with animals and cows and wearing my cowboy hat. It's not just a symbol anymore for me. It's actually a little bit of a rite of passage. I'm out there suffering
Right.
in this cold weather, trying to chip ice so that my cows have some water because, the heater just can't keep up with it and what have you. And I've got to say, I had a prideful moment there when my wife gave me this new hat and she said, because the one that you had is hammered, right? It's wasted. It's time for a new one. And I couldn't help but think of all the tough days out on the ranch doing the chores and the value that I receive from that. And the reason why I bring this up is I just want to encourage people to seek out those challenges in the things that you desire to be. And if there is something that's symbolic in your life, but you haven't actually done the work yet, don't be afraid to jump in with both feet and do the work to appreciate that symbol that you're looking at or making a part of your life, because there's so much value in the hard work. Whether that's just reading some of the books on your shelves, starting that business that you want to start, or learning how to play that instrument, or, like in Rod's example, getting out there and getting extreme. So, with some really challenging stuff. Rod, just to take it a little bit further in your book, there's so many great principles in here. And like you talked about, you kind of break down the values of the warpath. The title or the cover of the book says a battle plan to discover, develop, and deploy your superpowers. Could you just give people an overview of what that means and what they can expect? Because I think going into the new year, people need tools. And this book that you've written sits on my desktop. I refer to it once in a while. You're even surprised that I'm quoting it in some of our classroom settings with the young entrepreneurs. But I think it's an important tool. So can you give us an overview? Because I want people to be encouraged to pick this up and use it as a tool like I have.
Well, I'll if I can condense this, I started by doing a lot of research. It was on my heart to figure out what made leaders leaders. How did people become a leader? And part of that was because I was a leader, and it was thrust on me, and it was like a mantle thrown on me, and I embraced it. I rose to the occasion. It's like I got a new hat, right? And so I had to live up to the hat, right? And I realized, because I never felt worthy of it. I never felt worthy of a lot of the accomplishments that I had. And yet it happened anyway. And I thought, I'm just an ordinary guy. I'm from a lower middle class family of working people, and I never had anything. I didn't have big, glorious aspirations. I didn't have a dream. I didn't want to go to college. I didn't have any of that. And yet everything I did, I rose to the top. It happened. And when I started looking at it, I thought, well, why did that happen to me? I'm just an ordinary person, and there are so many people that have much more talent, who are much smarter than I am. And there are people who I know are like me. And that's really who I was writing the book for. It's the people who were like me that didn't realize that they are so full of potential, that they have talents that they haven't tapped into and they haven't recognized them. And so it's a battle plan, because they say, write what you know. And I was, my military background, I like that breakdown, here it is. You have to have a plan to go into battle. And so I wrote the book so that you could literally strategize your way through life, right? And if you're just somebody starting off, or if you're somebody who's been in business, but you feel like there's more, you feel unsatisfied with your job, these are the things that you can tap into. And those things are 8 things, right? The
Yep.
WARPATH acronym, but those are a breakdown of all of the greatest leaders I could find, from pastors to coaches to warriors, business people. And I literally read their biographies. I read their autobiographies. I read about them. I studied them, and I started writing down these values. And when I was done, I had like over 150 different values.
Hmm.
And then I started categorizing. You know how my mind works, Jim, right? I'm always trying to find
Yep.
order and chaos. And so I took all these values and I started overlaying them and overlapping them. I actually have some photos of the process where I've got sticky notes just covering an entire table, and I'm moving this value under this heading and this value under that heading, saying, okay, I've got to distill this down. I've got to get it down so it's a meal, right?
Yeah.
It can't just be an endless smorgasbord, or it's going to be, haphazard and a mess. And so finding the traits that every one of those great leaders, from, it didn't matter where their background was, where they came from, but they became great. They rose above. They became the greatest in their field, the greatest coaches, from Jesus Christ to Genghis Khan. I mean, they all shared similar values. And those traits, those leadership traits, everybody, this is it. This is the magic. Everybody has them. Everybody can learn them. Everybody can hone in on them. Everybody can develop them. So that's why it's discover them, right? Yeah, they have to be identified to be discovered, right? So I help you discover what they are. And then you get to develop them. That's where you start reading books. That's where you start putting yourself in different situations. But then it's the exercising. Once you see that you have them, then you start exercising, then you develop them, and then you deploy them. And when you deploy them, you're unstoppable. And so I want my mission statement, my personal mission statement is simply this: to empower ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. That's my personal goal. And so that's the goal of the WARPATH Alliance, right?
Yeah.
Discover, develop, and deploy your superpowers, because everybody is a superhero. Absolutely everybody you meet has a story, and they have talents, and they have leadership skills, and they have work ethic, and they have the right attitude, or it can be developed, right? People need to be taught. They need to be trained. They need to be mentored. They need to be coached. And that's what you and I get to do with the Young Entrepreneur Syndicate, right? We get to do all of those things. And the book was just my putting it out there. And the stories that I tell in the book illustrate that I'm just an ordinary guy. But some of these traits added to who I am. They added to my character. They added to my stamina. They added to my knowledge base. And when you're done, you get an author out of the deal. You get a business person out of the deal. And hopefully you change some lives out of that deal, right? You spark that little bit in somebody else that says, yeah, I had a situation like that. I can relate to that. And now they can see the value in it. Instead of just the trouble in it, instead of just the conflict in it, they can see the value in it. And when that happens, and I've had several people who have read the book who have come back and said, man, it's just this story was so powerful. I related to this thing that you said, and I get what you're saying here, and now I understand it. Before I didn't. So it's kind of like a maze, and I get to unlock it. But again, and this gets back to the writing process, I wanted to unwrap all of those values. But in unwrapping those values, I still didn't have a presentation. I didn't have a way forward with it until it literally was an epiphany during church, right? And it was, what gives those traits their value is the opposition to them. And for every one character trait that I have, I give 3 antithesis to it. Three things will come against you, and there's more than three, obviously, in every one of those areas. But it's recognizing that you're going to be under attack all the time. Every one of your values will be under assault. It will be assailed. It will be attacked all the time.
Yeah.
And it may not come all at once, but you'll get a little sideline skirmish over here and another one over here and another one over there. And it's a lot easier to deal with them once you recognize them. So hopefully identifying those skirmishes, right, is going to help people be ready for them. And when you're prepared for it, then you're, again, unstoppable. But you have to know what's out there, and then you have to know the countermeasure, right? So
Right.
This is the counterattack. You're on the attack. You're going to get ambushed, sidelined, whatever. Well, how do you combat that? And so that is the real magic, is knowing that this is in fact a battle. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We don't. We wrestle against the principalities and the rulers of the darkness of this present age, and flesh and blood. We wrestle against all of it, because we're all, even those people are tools. They're just being used as tools against you.
Rod, the biggest takeaway, and thank you for sharing your perspectives there and why you wrote the book and what people can receive from it. My biggest takeaway is that we all have the skills to achieve what we're seeking. And it's discovering that you have those skills to do that. And it's interesting as a coach, and both of us as adjunct professors at the high school, teaching the Young Entrepreneurs Syndicate curriculum and then our Monday night calls. It's interesting, and I'm sure you feel this way. You listen to the stories of the people, of our members, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can see a clear path almost every single time.
Right.
But yet they're in their own way.
Yes.
And, if you're listening, I just want to encourage you, if you're a member of the syndicate, thank you. And we appreciate you. And I want to remind you that we don't want members. We want participants. We want people that are going to seek out those tough stories, those days in the minus 20 degrees, gaining some grit to overcome your challenges. But if you're not a member, we would love for you to be one, or at least grab some of the tools on our website that don't cost you anything. You can download a chapter of Rod's book or my book. You can, there's resources there that you can grab that don't cost you a thing, or you can spend a few bucks and grab the WARPATH Alliance book from Rod and learn what we're talking about here. But Rod, what you said is so compelling for people to understand, is that we all possess the skills to do these things, right? It's just a matter of realizing that and having somebody encourage you along the way if you need it, but having the tools to get you there, like this book and like some of the things that we're doing in the syndicate. And I think that it's a great message going into the new year. So thanks for sharing that. Any final thoughts before I wrap this thing up?
I would like to remind people that you too are an author, and you've offered valuable insights in freedom to say yes. And yes, there are so many things that we are capable of, and we need to get out of our own ways. And sometimes we just need to understand what we've put in the way. And we're here to help. That's the whole thing. Our mission collectively as business people is to help as many people become successful as possible. That doesn't stop over the holidays. In fact, that fuels my desire to help more people. And especially going into the new year, if people are looking for a reason, if you have to have an excuse or a reason to start something new, pick it. I don't care what it is. If it happens to be an arbitrary date on the calendar, if it happens to be somebody insulted you at the dinner table and said you don't need another piece of pie, figure out what it is. Use that as an impetus to move forward. And we're here to help on every front. Because if we can help you be a better person, we're going to help you be a better business person. We can help you be a healthier person, the best version of yourself. And that's it's a great place to be. I'm glad that the good Lord has saw fit to bring us together for such a time as this.
I love it, Rod. Thanks for sharing a little bit more on WARPATH Alliance. like I said, I keep this book on my desktop, refer to it often. There's some great stuff in there, and it's become a tool for me. I hope that you decide to make it a tool for yourself. And if you're interested in the Young Entrepreneur Syndicate, you can hit us up on our Instagram page, which is Young Entrepreneur Syndicate, or that's youngentrepreneurssyndicate.com. We'd love to have you. As I mentioned, there's some free tools on there, but there's also a way to get involved. And as a reminder, we do weekly Zoom calls every Monday at 6 p.m. Montana time, as well as we've got a ton of back-end resources for our members, anywhere from business plans, how to raise capital. We also do for our annual members some one-on-one coaching calls where they get some allocated private time. And we've got this podcast, listen in. We've got blogs. We have a lot of areas covered. So we are here because we want to help you see success. And Rod and I both understand by helping others, we also receive the rewards of that. So thank you for listening. Share the show if you like it, and have a wonderful New Year's Eve.
Thanks, everybody.